mentioned just a moment ago, please help me welcome Mr. Michael Barr.
Savoy Blues, recorded by Louis Armstrong in July of 1927 in the mecca of jazz at the time, which was Chicago, Illinois. The reason Chicago was the mecca is because jazz, which was born in New Orleans, was connected to Chicago by the Mississippi River, which at the time was the only highway in America. So in 1927, Louis Armstrong hopped on a boat, went up to Chicago, Illinois, and brought with him Jass music. Now, back in the late 20s, jazz was spelled with S's at the end, J-A-S-S, because the Z was way too edgy to be put into print. So they spelled it with S's just to get a little bit more broader of appeal. Louis Armstrong, like I said, took it to Chicago. That was the mecca. That was the beginning. That is considered one of the first recordings of jazz music. To this day, one of the best recordings because it started a new art form, a new musical style. Now, eventually, jazz moved from Chicago to New York, Manhattan, specifically Harlem. During the Harlem Renaissance, you could go to a club, any place, probably every block there was a club, and there was music pouring out of these clubs, and that was swing music. And in my opinion, that's what people think of when they think of jazz music, is a big orchestra. Duke Ellington, Cab Calloway, even Ricky Ricardo led a big jazz band, swing band. And what they would do is they would have dances, and people would go and they would enjoy this music and they would dance to it. They even created a type of dance, swing dancing. That's where jazz was in the 30s and in the 40s. Not only in these clubs, but when you turned on the radio in your car, you would hear jazz music. Jazz music was the pop music of the 30s and 40s. Now, after the war, late 40s, people were coming, the soldiers were coming back. Jazz was still a very popular form of music. But what was also beginning to occur was the next phase of jazz music, which is called bebop. Now, bebop became a much more cerebral type of jazz. It transformed into something that you went and sat at a table and watched and listened to, as opposed to something that you interacted with and danced with. It's a funny story. Bebop actually grew out of swing music because when the band would go on a break, they didn't have an iPod to turn on and pump music into the background or play a CD. So 4 or 5 of the guys would stay up on the bandstand while the rest of the band went and had a break, and they would play music, just 4 or 5 of them. So that's what bebop is a smaller group in a smaller club. This happened during the 50s and into the 60s is what bebop was. At the same time, rock and roll was born. And so you've got jazz and rock and roll, and they're duking it out for supremacy in pop music. Now, swing music was very simple melodies, easy to digest, easy to listen to. Bebop, conversely, was very complicated. It had a lot of notes, we'll say. You hear Charlie Parker and he says, and people couldn't really follow it. It would go over the heads of most casual listeners. So rock and roll, 3 chords, would keep people's attention. Buddy Holly, Elvis, it was easily digestible. Rock and roll became, the pop music became the main thing that people would listen to. And it sent jazz on a trajectory which would land it in academia, which is where it is today. You can go into you can go to New York into a club and hear jazz music any night of the week. You can go into smaller cities and hear it maybe once a week. So jazz is now in the schools. The reason I am here to talk to you today is to share with you my vision and my mission for our community. My vision is to create the Azalea City Jazz Society with the intent to educate and entertain our community and the surrounding areas in America's art form. So I said that it started in New Orleans, and it truly is an American art form because at the time in New Orleans in the mid to late 1800s, there was a class of people, the Creoles. Now the Creoles were of African heritage and European heritage. And jazz music is a combination of African rhythms and instruments like the banjo and the drums, and European harmonies and instruments like violin and trumpet and clarinet. The Creoles had the freedom to combine these two heritages together. And that's what created jazz. So my vision is to have a place where our community can hear jazz. I can see small group jazz combos playing at the Azalea Festival, or playing at a downtown event, or at a grand opening for a car lot. Something that is typically performed by a southern rock band could not be replaced because there's enough room for all of us, but a demand from our community to hear America's art form and to understand it. Like I said, in regards to the bebop, jazz can be complicated. So I have a vision of showing concerts that also include lectures, that give a brief synopsis of what I just said, of where jazz came from, how it came into being, but maybe get a little more in depth, and then provide a live example. So you can have a group that plays a Charlie Parker tune, and then you would have someone come out and speak about where this came from, how to listen to it, and how to enjoy it. I see people getting excited about jazz music and wanting to hear it. I have a passion for this because I am a jazz major. I have 2 degrees, one from Valdosta State University, one from the University of South Carolina. And when I graduated South Carolina, I spent a year as a bass player for a band that played every Thursday night at a local brewery. And we had a jazz open mic. And I'll tell you, that real live experience of me playing, I learned and retained more in that 1 year than I did during school. Because in school, kids will fall into a trap of going to class, rehearsing, playing in their combo, packing up, leaving, and maybe doing 2 shows a semester. Having an outlet for them to come once a week and real live, immediate feedback from in front of people is a great way to develop them as musicians and students and allow them to get more bang for their buck, if you will, with the education. So what I am here today is to ask for your support as members of this community to help me in my vision of spreading America's art form throughout the country. Monetary donations are always accepted, as little or as much as you want to give, but more important than money is participation, is going to see the shows and congratulating people when you hear it and talking to your neighbors and your friends and explaining where you heard this great jazz music, how much fun you had at that restaurant and got to hear some local VSU students performing jazz in your own neighborhood. Something that has been with America, that is truly accepted in the world as America's art form. So I urge your consideration, and thank you very much.